It's another amazing day in paradise. This is Mama Kai. I'm coming to you today because there are just some things that are sitting heavy on my spirit. And there was a document that I had written to present to at a community meeting that happened back in December. And it was regarding a incident where there was a student at a high school here who had stabbed and killed another student and seriously injured another one. And he is now and at that time, he had been arrested, obviously, but he was also being charged as an adult. And he was maybe 14 or 15 at the time. And it had me real hot. I still am hot about it, and I'm not yet in a position to do something about it, but I intend to. And so at this community meeting, I wanted to address things that are not being addressed. And one of them, the main thing I wanted to address is what I call the science of violence. Science of violence. It's hard not to say the silence of violence, but it is the science of violence. And so I'm going to read an excerpt from what I wrote. Most of it was a long introduction of who I am, but the nitty-gritty is this part that I'm going to read here now. Says, the biggest lesson I've learned about being a parent is, while it is definitely an incredible spiritual experience, and there is a large physical, mental, and emotional investment, it is mostly a scientific experience, because we are responsible for how our children's brains develop and how they learn to regulate their nervous systems. I take pride in being an amateur scientist who studies these things. For many people in this room, what I say will activate some nervous systems. Some will dismiss me because you don't believe in science, quote unquote. But I'm asking for your grace because none of us would be here if it weren't for science. The only way any of us got here was because a sperm and an egg connected and a baby grew out of that. That's the foundation of all human life. But the science doesn't stop there. The challenge we all have is, unfortunately, that's where the education tends to end when it comes to bringing children into this world. I don't want to dismiss Mr. Farrell, he's the deceased young man, or his family's experience, but I'm being led to focus on Mr. General's experience because they are so interconnected. We can't let two lives be lost in this experience. I can't personally let that happen. I'm shocked and dismayed that the district attorney, being familiar with ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, wants to try him as an adult. Despite his age and what we think he should know about right and wrong, I'm here to drop some science behind this young man's behavior. Mr. General's prefrontal cortex has only been developing for the last 7 to 8 years of his life. He still has 12 to 13 years to go before it is completely developed, if it completely develops at 25. According to the National Institute of Health, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that, quote, regulates higher order decision making and to plan and organize for the future. Under non-stress conditions, NON-STRESS, under non-stress conditions, the extensive connections of the prefrontal cortex orchestrate the brain's activity for intelligent regulation of behavior, thought, and emotion. That's under non-stress conditions, when it's fully developed, between the ages of 25 and 30. When you're under stressful conditions, and clearly this child was with an undeveloped prefrontal cortex, he was working out of his primitive or reptilian brain. Dr. Dan Siegel, a medical doctor with training in pediatrics and child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry, speaks and writes extensively about brain development in children and how it relates to parenting. A post from the, quote, Kids That Go website uses his, quote, analogy of a house to explore the upper and lower parts of the brain. The downstairs brain, often referred to as the reptilian or primitive brain, contains the brainstem, limbic region, and the amygdala. This instinctive part of the brain is well developed from birth and is responsible for 1. Basic functioning, like breathing, blinking, heart beating, flinching, digestion, etc. 2. Innate responses such as fight, flight, freeze, and flop, and also producing strong emotions such as anger and fear. Mr. General was and probably still is living out of his primitive brain. His sympathetic nervous system was engaged, which promotes a fight or flight response. In that state of being, his actions cannot do anything but reflect his need to protect himself, no matter what anyone wants to believe to the contrary. Why? Because we are groomed in a society where violence is the primary answer. Violence isn't always physical either. There are a lot of mental, spiritual, and emotional incidences of violence too. If children and adults aren't actively taught what to do otherwise, the result will generally be violence. Our natural instinct says to protect ourselves, and we have a choice between fight, flight, freeze, or flop. That's what the primitive brain says you need to do in order to protect yourselves. This comes from the thousands of years we lived as hunter-gatherers, and this is collective to every group in society, in America, in the world. You see it in the toddler who isn't getting their way and they physically lash out. They don't even understand what hitting means to society yet. They are acting out of natural instinct to express their displeasure over whatever it is that's uncomfortable to their developing psyche. Too often they are popped or spanked or whipped to make them stop. That toddler is learning that violence is the way. When that toddler cries, they are told to stop crying. When that toddler becomes a child or a young person, they don't cry, they get angry. That anger doesn't disappear. It goes somewhere. And we're seeing it come out as words, through fists, knives, and guns in the lives of unregulated children, youth, and adults. Even if a child isn't being hit, there is violence on TV, in video games, and in music. Clearly, we are seeing it in our communities, in our schools, and sadly, there is a lot of violence at home. When it's in the home, the child might not get hit, but the child is still seeing how situations are handled, and they are learning that violence is the way to get power. For generations, including the one that's growing up now, we have a world where children are shown that there are only two ways to power: violence and money. So if you feel powerless and you don't have any money to shield yourself or exhibit fake power, then the only way to feel powerful is violence. At the end of the day, we can talk about emotions all we want, but what is happening in our communities is scientific because that's where our emotions come from. It is based on brain development, nervous system regulation, trauma, and nutrition. The solution is tapping into a beautiful gift called neuroplasticity, which simply means our brain's ability to change. We have to reverse the system of oppression that starts in childhood. Implement emancipating practices and focus on the liberation of ourselves to live our best lives. I don't say this because I'm beyond this. I say this because it's me, because this is me. It's what I'm in the trenches working on right now within myself and with my superhero. Wisdom teaches me what oppression, emancipation, and liberation look like from his perspective. He's teaching, I'm learning, and I'm hoping that the loss of Mr. Farrell's life can lead us to liberation individually and collectively. Thank you. If this message resonated with you, that we need to understand the science of violence in order to stop it, please read the description to find out how you can help me bring this message to the masses. Continued success, everyone. Peace.